I think the number one problem, the number one challenge for companies investing in China is finding out what their motivation is. Early on, everybody was really interested in China because it's a big population. There is a very big difference between a population and a market. And companies need to really find out why they're going in China and why they're doing what they're doing. Many of the times that we work with companies who are getting into trouble, they find the wrong partner, they're going into the wrong industry or whatever. It's because they really weren't quite sure why they were going in the first place. Companies need to make sure that everybody agrees why they're doing what they're doing. The CEO, the CFO, the salesperson, the board, everybody needs to agree that this is what they want to do, because China is for the long haul. It's not a 9-month mini project. You're going to be there for a long time. It's going to go up and down, and you've got to have the staying power to really succeed there. The second issue in China is a lack of information. Deng Xiaoping in 1991 gave his famous speech, several famous speeches, where he really opened up the China market. And one of his things he said is that development in China, the way forward in China, is not going to be a smooth path. There's not a bridge to the future of China. It's going to be, he said, like crossing the river by feeling for stones. And it was a really good image, because there's a rushing river in front of you and stones peeking up. You're not sure if they're really stones or what they are, if they're safe, and you have to kind of gingerly put your foot out, test it, then go to the next one, then go to the next one. That's China. You're going to have to make decisions on the basis of a lack of information, and that's very difficult for some companies to do. Number three, similar to kind of a follow-on to number two, is in China there's always a story behind the story. There's a person behind the person. There is, it's never what you see on the front end, and it's partially related to cultural issues. I mean, for 5,000 years, there's been this inside-outside orientation to much of Chinese cultures, and as an outsider, you're shown a certain view. As an insider, you're shown a certain view, and there are various levels of being an insider or an outsider. Again, when you're trying to do business with someone, do business with a company, with a person, it's important to find out where this person is from, where this company is from. What is their history? How did they become who they are today? How did they get their money? Who is behind them? There's always someone sitting behind someone, and not in a nefarious way. It's not some, you're not talking to some puppet or some shadow. But there just is a level of complexity to Chinese business and to Chinese society that is that's important to take into account. So we advise companies never stop asking questions. The fourth challenge to foreign investors in China is understanding the role of the government. Obviously, Chinese government is very involved in business, is very interested in business, and for the past, 40 years, 30 years, has been in the process of divesting themselves to a certain extent of business. About 15 years ago, the Chinese government made a statement that they were going to get out of the business of being in business, and they started to release a lot of the state-owned firms, and you saw this wave of privatization of Chinese state-owned entities, SOEs. Then a number of years later, the government came out and said, well, yes, we want to divest, but we also want to maintain some control here. And we want to maintain some influence in key sectors, in the oil and gas sector, in transportation, in railway transportation, in media, in things like that. And they stopped the opening of some of those. Even in some of the private companies that have completely privatized, there are governments and government influence behind them. Particularly if you are doing business with smaller companies in companies in smaller towns outside of the big city. If you're doing a deal with even a private company there, they have heavy government involvement. The government is very interested, the local government in those places is very interested in their success and make sure that they maintain a revenue base through this company, they maintain an employment base through this company. So if you're doing a deal with them, particularly if you're trying to acquire them or do a joint venture with them, it's absolutely critical to find out what the local government thinks. The final thing, and this is something that I've learned, is that talking about China and having one definition for what it means to do business in China is impossible. It is very different to do business in Beijing versus Shanghai, Shanghai versus a tier 2 or tier 3 city. It's very different to do business in the consumer sector versus electronics versus industrial versus whatever. And so China is such a complex place, and as business people, our goal is to reduce complexity. We want to reduce risk by understanding the complexity and then packaging it up so that we can identify it. China resists that at every turn. The vast majority of crises that we help our clients deal with is because they brought someone from Beijing or Shanghai to try to solve a problem out in one of the tier 3 or tier 4 cities. And the people there treated that person, a Chinese person from Shanghai or Beijing, like a foreigner. Actually, matter of fact, treated them worse than a foreigner. They just didn't accept them locally. So all business in China is local, and all locales can be quite different from each other.